Hi, we're Quaint and Curious, you know, Quaint and Curious Volumes. My name is James. It is a Friday, and that is the day that I sit down on the floor next to the chairs that you can see Louise, and I tell you about what I read last week. I think I missed it last week. Anyway, I've been rather busy with my day job, my regular job. So not as much reading as typical this week. However, I did finish Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert, the second book of the Dune series. This is a fantastic book. It's if you read and liked the first book, Dune, um, you should certainly read this to see what happens to Paul Atreides, the protagonist of Dune. I'm not going to give any spoilers or anything like that, but people will say that this book is such a major change from the first because whereas the first was sort of a sprawling epic, this is kind of limited, has it's very interior and centers around conversations and plots and schemes and things. I would say yes. However, there the first book was also, for all its kind of vast scale, it was very contained. For example, in the first Dune, we're in a universe where there's an emperor and there are various noble houses that have competing interests, and but the only ones that you can name the Atreides and the Harkonnen, right? And if you really go into it, the emperor's house, Corino, I think it's called, and so all of this kind of imagined medieval complexity is boiled down to two houses and really very few people. If you think of the Atreides going to administer an entire planet, but their staff, the ones that you can name, it's like less than half a dozen people. So then, but he invokes all this other stuff, which is amazing. Here also, he's still invoking a great, vast universe, an empire that has been built in the 12 years since the end of Dune. And still, we have a very small cast of named characters, even though he's introducing a whole lot of new concepts and organizations, things that are in this book that were completely new and aren't. Frank Herbert's way is not to beat you over the head with his world building. He's really good at that, and it's one of the reasons I think that I like him more than I like most science fiction. Is that the world building is it's not just big dumps of techno gibberish. Probably the well, anyway. So there are a whole bunch of concepts in here that are nowhere in the first Dune book. And unlike the first Dune book, this does not have a glossary at the end to explain things, but you still get it. So the things that are in this book that are new and are not in the glossary of the first Dune book, I checked. So they were introduced here. The concept of a Gola, the organization, or the concept of a face dancer, and the Kizarite. All this stuff is new in here. Not defined. You pick it up because he's that good. The Tleilaxu are in fact in the glossary of the first Dune book, but have very little to do with what's going on here. An interesting thing is there is kind of dropped in the middle of this the fact that the Tleilaxu had their own Kwisatz Haderach, which we never heard about before. There could be multiple for different. Anyway, now I'm getting into the weeds of Dune lore, and you don't come here for that. You come. But anyway, yeah. So it's a lot shorter than the first Dune. It really kind of flies by. There's a lot of dialogue in it that, boy, does it change your perception of Paul Atreides. So I highly recommend that. Um, I finished with Steve Donahue, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. If you were reading Jane Austen along with Steve's read along, um, you know how much fun it is. It's also quite a lengthy undertaking because he doesn't just read it to you, he gives his own sort of reactions after having read this book, probably dozens of times. Um, it was, and he's a big fan of it, as you can tell. He's very enthusiastic about it. But there is a part at the end that he calls the greatest crime against art in human history in this book that he loves so much. So that was a real treat to hear him explaining why this scene is the greatest crime against art in human history. Um, most readers would not dress down Jane Austen, but he's certainly done his homework enough to point out what he takes as a shortcoming. Um, so let's see. I had thought maybe I would read Sense and Sensibility or Persuasion this year, but maybe next year will be the year for one of those. So I started the other day The Good Soldier by Maddox Ford. This is one that I said I would read this year, and I'm about 3 chapters in, so I hope to make some more headway on this this weekend. I'm really, really getting into it, and it's all this for me is it's like True Grit by Charles Portis. The narrator's voice, the voice of the narrator, is so kind of entrancing. You just want to keep going and see what they're gonna say, what they're gonna come up with next. But also the kind of world that he's describing. So this is a book he wrote in 1913, and it involves at its center 2 married couples, the narrator and his wife, and Edward Ashburnham and Mrs. Ashburnham, Leonora, and they're all the narrator and his wife are Americans. The Ashburnhams are English, and they meet on the continent at some kind of resort that they go to for health reasons. So the narrator's wife, Florence, and Captain Edward Ashburnham have similar health conditions, a heart condition or something, and this spa is where they get some kind of treatment. Maybe it's a sanitarium, but not quite like the Magic Mountain, I guess. Somewhere between the Magic Mountain and that beach where Marcel goes with his grandma. Anyway, let me just read you just a little bit of this to give you a taste of why I think it's so great. Because he's talking about Captain Ashburnham, and he's like, it turns out that he was a great reader, of sentimental novels. Novels in which typewriter girls married marquises and governesses earls. And in his books, as a rule, the course of love ran as smooth as buttered honey. And he was fond of poetry of a certain type, and he could even read a perfectly sad love story. I have seen his eyes filled with tears at reading of a hopeless parting, and he loved with a sentimental yearning all children, puppies, and the feeble generally. So you see, he would have plenty to gurgle about to a woman. With that and his sound common sense about martingales and his still sensational experiences as a county magistrate, and with his intense optimistic belief that the woman he was making love to at that moment was the one he was destined at last to be eternally constant to, well, I fancy he could put up a pretty good idea of talk when there was no man around to make him feel shy. And I was quite astonished during his final burst out to me at the very end of things, when the poor girl was on her way to that fatal Brindisi, and he was trying to persuade himself and me that he had never really cared for her. I was quite astonished to observe how literary and how just his expressions were. He talked quite a good book, a book not in the least cheaply sentimental. You see, I suppose he regarded me not so much as a man. I had to be regarded as a woman or a solicitor. Anyhow, it burst out of him on that horrible night. And then next morning he took me over to the assizes, and I saw how, in a perfectly calm and businesslike way, he set to work to secure a verdict of not guilty for a poor girl, the daughter of one of his tenants, who had been accused of murdering her baby. He spent £200 on her defense. Well, that was Edward Ashburnham. I had forgotten about his eyes. They were as blue as the sides of a certain type of box of matches. When you looked at him carefully, you saw they were perfectly honest, perfectly straightforward, perfectly stupid. But the brick pink of his complexion running perfectly level to... Okay, it goes on. It's... I mean... if that doesn't make you want to keep reading, I do not know what to tell you. Another thing about Ashburnham telling him about just stuff like this won't be long. Oh yes, he told me he told me that I could buy my special shade of blue ties cheaper from a firm in Burlington Arcade than from my own people in New York, and I've bought my ties from that firm ever since. Otherwise, I should not remember the name of Burlington Arcade. I wonder what it looks like. I have never seen it. I imagine it to be two immense rows of pillars, like those of the Forum in Rome, with Edward Ashburnham striding down between them. But it probably isn't the least like that. Once he advised me to buy Caledonian Deferred since they were due to rise, and I did buy them, and they did rise. But of how he got the knowledge, I haven't the faintest idea. It seems to drop out of the blue sky. So, anyway, I'm loving this so far. It seems to, it's being told in retrospect. So the main events of the story are in the past. It seems to jump around in time a bit in that sort of modernist way, and it promises to be the saddest story the narrator has ever heard. So there is that, and I recommend, if you, based on the first 30 pages, that you give it a try as well. I'm also, of course, still reading very slowly Randall Jarell's selected poems. This past weekend was the North Carolina Folk Festival, which is held every September in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is sort of the next city over from Winston-Salem, where I live. So I go there every year if I can make it, and I usually can. It's a free event with live music and craft vendors, food trucks, and just a good time, and just little kind of events that will be set up in different places in between jam sessions or dance demonstrations. So I saw a band called the Blue Ridge Girls, which are some friends and acquaintances of mine performing. I saw a great big group of like 30 people playing basically what used to be called world music, pieces of music from all over the world, and kind of like a big sort of international music choir in a way. And that was better than it sounds. I saw a singer-songwriter who, a la the early The Mountain Goats, goes by the name She Waits for War, even though it's but one person. And that was pretty good. I enjoyed that. I saw a breakdancing demonstration, and I saw a Sacred Steel performance, which is kind of a steel guitar used in a gospel music context. So that's always fun. While I was there, I stopped into there's an independent bookstore on Elm Street in Greensboro called Scuppernong Books, and they have both new and used books. So I got something, I don't know where it is, but I also picked up a new copy of Lunch Poems by Frank O'Hara, and I brought it up to the counter. I generally don't buy new books, but the City Lights Pocket Post, they're rather affordable, and the young woman at the register said I put it down like this, I think, and she said, "Is that lunch poems?" I said, "Yes, it is." And she said, "Oh, I love that book." I recognize the orange, of course. And I picked this up well last week. If you watched my poetry Thursday, where I read a Peter Sheldal poem, I talked a bit about Peter Sheldal, the art critic, whose daughter wrote a memoir of him called "Also a Poet." The author's Ada Calhoun. And Pat from Book Chat with Pat said, "Yeah, I read that last year, and it's really good." And Pat was also a fan of Peter Sheldal's art criticism. So I started listening to Ada Calhoun's memoir, "Also a Poet." It's on Spotify, one of the audiobooks you can hear for free on Spotify. If you're She and I are close in age. She grew up in the East Village of New York. I grew up in a decidedly unhip part of Long Island. But, New York, downtown, East Village, all that stuff was kind of a thing that was fascinating to me as a young person. And she sort of grew up in the midst of it. So it's really kind of a neat look at that. But also, that book is a lot about Frank O'Hara, the poet, author of Lunch Poems, who her father was friendly with and had been planning to write a biography of, which was never actually completed. So it's a strange sort of hybrid memoir and also kind of halfway a biography of Frank O'Hara and partly a biography of Peter Sheldal. Unusual, really well written, and if you have the audiobook sections that would have been transcribed in the book, you hear the actual recordings of interviews that her father conducted with Frank O'Hara's friends and relatives. So that's a recommendation from me. I've got a whole bunch of stuff on the go as usual. One more that I also started, and I'm only a few chapters in, is a historical novel about Edith, who was a Scottish princess. The book is called "The Saxon Princess," and it's I think it's on it's on Kindle Unlimited. I'm reading it with my wife. She loves historical fiction about European courts, and particularly about women in European courts and medieval through Renaissance history and things like that. So we're reading that together. I'll probably tell you more about it next week when I have more of a sense of it. But anyway, that's what I have this week. Look at all these books. Okay, thanks for watching. All right, ladies. Okay. Thanks for watching. Bye.